Welcome back on the second hour. As I had alluded to earlier, is that partly why we are having the global recession and why the cost of living and cost of food is quite high is because of climate change. We have negatively affected the climate, and over the years, because of a number of factors, including carbon emissions, the change in the climate has caused untold suffering, and especially in the developing countries, Kenya being one of them. And you can tell by the prices that we are having when you go to the supermarket or when you go to buy food, you can feel that pinch, and it's because of climate change. And my guests on the second hour will be talking about climate change, and they want to be walking from here to Egypt, where the COP27 will be held a little bit later this year. Well, away from that, we are talking about climate change. The COP27 is actually it's just the final preparations for that will be held in Egypt. And my guests today, they are experts in matters climate change, and they will be giving us an insight on the same end in regards to a work that they intend to begin in regards to climate change. That is why actually partly why we are experiencing what we're experiencing in terms of high cost of living in this world. Allow me to introduce my guest. From my immediate left, he is the coordinator Global March for Planet, Danielle Helmer. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Indeed. And we have Prince Papa. Prince Papa is the programs manager of Laudato C Movement. First things first, Laudato C Movement. In a nutshell, what exactly do you focus in your movement?
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you on behalf of the movement for having us at KBC. Much appreciated. Laudato Si it itself is an encyclical written by Pope Francis in the year 2015, just before COP15 in Paris, right? So there is a letter or a book encouraging the people of faith to look at how we relate to the world, and really determining how we consume our resources, how we relate to one another, how we relate to wildlife. In a nutshell, what brings climate change and what the people of faith can really have tangible actions to safeguard our common home. And so the movement was started around that time to mobilize the people of faith to take climate action seriously within their communities and nationally, wherever they are living.
And Danielle, tell us something about Global March for Planet. I'm talking about March. You're hoping to cover 4,800 kilometers from here to Egypt. Tell us something about that.
Yeah, and this is an initiative that was started right here in Kenya, in Nairobi. This has been an initiative that's been working since January and February. Actually, since another process of the UN process is just like the climate change conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, which was the UN Environmental Assembly. And so there's been a lot of people in Nairobi and all across Kenya who have been working on this. And the march is stemming from an idea that also connected to a march many years ago in 2019 from India to Switzerland and Geneva, which is spanning over 1 year. And this march over 4,868 miles will actually be a combination between foot march and also caravan, so driving as well, because we know we only have 6 weeks to get between here this week all the way up to COP27 in Egypt, and so it will go through several different countries, and this is why it's a combination between foot and driving.
Indeed, and I want us to really focus on that, because at the end of the day, it's all about the climate. Gentlemen, you've had those two functions. It's indeed Kenyans now are seeing the effects of climate change, and they are committed towards enhancing not only aquatic in Mombasa. We've seen the farmer talking about seeds in the country. It's a good gesture.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if we look at the northern parts of Kenya, several countries have been declared on several occasions annually that people will be starving, right? And this is an annual occurrence, and each year it keeps on repeating itself. I do like what Greenpeace is doing today, taking the government to court to talk on behalf of the farmers. I can relate this to a few years ago when the people, the community in Lamu, collaborated with the people of Kenya and several organizations on climate, and took the same government to the court when there was this proposed coal power plant in Lamu. Same thing in Kitui. If we look at that, Kenya and most African countries rely on agriculture for sustenance, and we are told it's the backbone of our communities, of the society. And things like fossil fuels, coal power plants, oil and gas, these are the worst in terms of emitting CO2, that really in terms add the CO2 into oxygen, into the air, to really fast track or help increase these catastrophes. We talk about flooding, we talk about droughts, and this directly impacts the agriculture that our people depend on. And if you look at the number of people employed in the agricultural sector, it's massive. And if the yields keep on decreasing annually, we see the living standards of people also decreasing annually. Then we don't have a people with, we talk about the integrity of human being. A human being that cannot feed himself does not have that integrity. And let me connect it to President Ruto's recent speech towards affirming that Kenya is committed to Agenda 2030 on climate, that Kenya would like to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2030. Renewable energy is the safest way to go for the world right now. Very minimal or no impact on agriculture, people's lives, on wildlife, and so forth. And the Greenpeace case at the coast right now talks about that in today's world, the government cannot just come into your community and start projects without your consent. And this is really at the base of when the National Environmental Tribunal suspended the proposed coal power plant in Lamu. This was one of the major reasons. You must ask the community, do you need this thing? And you must explain to the community what impacts is it going to have on your lives. And this is what we call, in SDGs language, a sustainable development, looking at people and looking at other aspects of development.
Indeed. And Helmer, looking at the crisis that we are in, the climate change crisis that we are in, is partly because of what we have done or what we have failed to do in regards to the environment. And you have been quoted talking about how the climate has affected communities in Africa, and that is why you want to create this awareness. Looking at Africa, we have the lowest amounts of even carbon emissions compared to other continents, but incidentally we are the worst affected in terms of the food sustenance.
Yeah, and this is, I think, why it was so important to for earlier with Greenpeace Africa to talk about indigenous seeds and also the accessibility of this, because right now what we're seeing, and even what this march is working to do, is actually tell stories both on what's happening right now across Kenya, across East Africa, also across Africa as well, but where, as well as also what Kenyans are doing all across Kenya, and also what other Africans are doing all across the continent and East Africa to try and deal with these issues that are right now, and addressing many different sectors, because as we see, climate change is just a thing that is compressing the already difficult issues that are happening across the continent. And so one of the things, even right now, we have youth that are over on the coast, actually near Mombasa, near Mosambweni, who are also talking about the blue economy. We also have along the way, we're going to be telling stories and documenting, and then also trying to work on to tell the stories that many communities are actually doing, not only just that they're facing with the climate crisis and the impact of also things like pollution, also things like not less access to food. Even one of the big symbols that we have is Lake Victoria, where around the communities around Lake Victoria are impacted by climate change and pollution, and their food source from fish and the lessening of that. And so these are things that we see, that not only that a majority of pollution and of carbon emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions are being done by other countries, especially countries in the global north, but where this means right now, one of the biggest things is that we also, for Africa, and especially for East Africa, and even for Kenya, that we're seeing, through droughts and everything like that, is we have to also do adaptation. So many projects around Kenya, as we see, even the indigenous seas projects are about adapting and also mitigating at the same time, because even we know that our forests the forests in Africa, and including in Kenya and also across the continent, are actually a really important source of mitigation of climate through carbon sources, and right now, because of the many different factors that are happening, and including already of poverty and other things that are forcing people to cut down forests, we're seeing that right now this is all going together, and so this is why we're doing this march across Kenya and across East Africa up to Egypt.
Interesting facts that Danielle is alluding to. And you had touched something on clean energy, because that will be quite something, if at all we as the world and as Kenya can adopt that. It's one of the SDGs. And adaptation of clean energy, we're talking about nuclear, we're talking about wind, we're talking about geothermal and alternative sources of energy. But looking at Africa, and in particular Kenya, we are talked about we could be able to be using nuclear energy by the year 2030. Okay, I don't know where exactly those plans are, but looking at these financial requiring activities, the nuclear power stations. In Africa, I think we are 2 or 3 countries that are using nuclear energy, but we have really invested in wind and geothermal. Are these bearing any fruits in regards to the Kenyan situation?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, people like us in the environmental sector, we do not consider really nuclear an alternative. But on technicalities, it can be discussed. Africa is not ready for nuclear energy. If you look at it entirely, and how if you look at the historical data on where nuclear has been. But we promote wind, we promote geothermal, we promote tidal, and so forth. We promote solar. And look at Rift Valley from the start to where it ends. This is a really, really hot source of geothermal that can drive our countries. An example is where we are, Kenya, which is doing great globally, actually globally amongst the leading in terms of geothermal. And all this require great infrastructural support in terms of finance. And while we are sensitizing communities and also taking governments or corporations to the court, we are also asking the perpetrators of climate catastrophes, right? These are the US, EU, the development world, which have caused this massively, to pay for it in form of reparations, in what we call climate finance. And this is the money that should be funding these projects. So if the perpetrators really were, if they really, in Paris they committed some billions of money, right? In several COPs they are committing these billions of money. In Africa, we are coming to Egypt now. I hope they are also going to commit billions of money, but they are not issuing this money. And this money is not a charity to us. We are asking you to pay for the mess that you've caused, and this money will be able to finance these bigger investments. And so we are saying that 100% renewable energy is very, very crucial for Africa. And if you look at, I know people of my age, maybe we were born when the telephone booths were dying, right? And now everyone has a phone. Do you know that course that was there, right? There is how it's going to be met in terms of also energy access and clean energy access to Africans. We have, let's say, right now we are seeing smaller engagements of communities using solar lamps. We are having smaller wind powers everywhere. But in essence, this has to also take into consideration the community needs, that the energy has to serve the immediate community. Not that it goes to a centralized place where it's even higher in terms of accessibility to the common man. And if this will be achievable, which is very, very great, because we have scientific innovations even here in Africa. Look at Uganda. Kira Motors, just a few months ago, manufactured its first solar bus. This is possible in Kenya. We have University of Nairobi. We have JQuat, always producing engineers every year, right? This is possible. It's the only thing that is possible is that the level of goodwill from our leaders, be it the politics, be it the government, be it the private sector, we lack that goodwill. We want this fast return on investment. But the longer investment in the renewable energy, this is where we'll get jobs for our people, because the job is not going to get away. And if you look at the farmers itself, they are going to be enjoying, because there is little or minimum impacts of these projects if they are made as per ESIAs specific to these communities without any external interference into this.
It's a very valid point that Prince is talking about, Helmer. And looking at communities in Africa, the literacy levels are quite low. There are still people who believe that the season is being controlled only by God. And as we are waiting for God to work his miracles and bring the rain, if we don't do our job, we are not going to be having enough rains, and unfortunately we are so reliant on rain-fed agriculture. And one of the things I saw, we had a story here on Saturday, I think Saturday or Sunday, where we saw some of the endangered turtles dying at the coast because they have ingested a lot of plastic, which they are confusing with the jellyfish. And trying to tell people that we need to conserve mangroves at the coast, we need to conserve the environment, we need to clean beaches, we need clean energy, and our literacy levels are quite low. Have you encountered a lot of challenges in trying to change the mindset of communities where you have already worked with?
Yes, and I think this is even where, because what this march is also about, and it's even being seen as a movement now as well, is about, it's actually, as Prince has noted, sustainable development, and actually looking at a focus, because we see, especially right now, the sustainable development goals between all 17 is actually the focus of this, because we know that everything goes together, and especially for Kenya and for Africa, this is where we're seeing all these different effects, and how if we really focus on addressing all of these together, we really can make a difference. And so I know even that there's even this weekend was World Cleanup Day, and we had actually even across Nairobi and across Kenya, we had many different cleanups, including part of build-up events for this march here. And so we've had, for instance, I know, and where in Nairobi itself, there were many different cleanups from Alsop's bus station to Majengo settlement to many other places where they were cleaning up the plastics. And actually, even in Kibera, there was a cleanup by youth that were cleaning up the Nairobi River, which actually connects to many different water sources, including going all the way to the coast. And so we're seeing that all this together is affecting, and so if we're working together across the communities, that we can really make a difference just by the collective effort of everyone together. And so I know that even, for instance, the Kisumu Untitled Champions and others out in Kisumu have been doing cleanups for many months, and as part of actually a campaign called Let Lake Victoria Breathe Again. And this is affecting the health of communities across the lake because of the plastic pollution that's happening. Even that even with when they're able to eat fish, there's the accumulation of pollution, including plastics, in the fish that then go into the body. And so they've not only been cleaning up, but then they've been doing sensitization projects. And so that's part of this all too as well. And in seeing this march not just as walking, but then this is really helping to build local movements and help to build more people in, because part of it is knowing what the effects are happening and knowing that that's happening, including for climate change. And that's where this is really meant to look at building the local movement, getting people to know, talking about all the different things that are happening and how it all goes together, including the need for access to free education, or to access to education. Because even, for instance, we have a program of a partner just in Nairobi, in Mbakasi, near Jacaranda, where it's working with youth who are playing sports and actually planting trees for every goal that's scored. of the kids, and then one of the things that the answer that they also are asking for at COP27 is actually education. Help us to get education so that we can have a future. And so these are key things that sensitization is just one part to start to build a movement to really change the face of Africa, to change even the face of the world. And so these are really key things that
and those concerted efforts are bearing fruits, right?
Yes.
Prince, looking at the developed countries, you've mentioned indeed they even have they have sacrificed billions of shillings in matters climate. They have been accused of not really being fully committed to climate change discussions. And exactly, talking is one thing, but the gases that they emit each and every year, and now we have COP27, and it's something that has been discussed over the years, and that is why perhaps they have those fines that you have mentioned. Why is it that the West, being the countries that bear the biggest burden when it comes to concerted efforts, they are questioned by even Africans ourselves?
Yeah, thank you. Before I get to that, I would like to just add to something you asked Danielle on the level of awareness within the people. Mm-hmm. In Kenya, during the last election, we saw the influence of the church to the peace, their contribution to the peace of the country. And Laudato Si movement works within the Catholic Church, which is by far the largest faith-based movement. We have also the Anglicans, a wing called the Green Anglicans. Now, in 1 out of 5 persons anywhere in the world, 1 is a Catholic, and 3 believe in God. They have some form of faith. If we could have a greater involvement of the clergy into the sensitization on climate change and climate action, then we will beat by far this level of unawareness, or if you want to call it climate ignorance, right? And also, if we look at the leadership levels, we will have these commitments from the governments in terms of also helping create awareness and take action. Mm-hmm. Now, back to your question on the developed world and their commitments. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's business as usual. Nobody is just willing to let go. And a classical example is France. Total Energies is based in France. It's a French multinational. And it has proposed to have a heated crude oil pipeline down from Hoima in Uganda up to the port of Tanga in Tanzania. Initially, this project was intended to pass through Kenya. But, in Uganda, there is that little democratic space. In Tanzania as well. So the president of Uganda says Kenyans will destroy my oil and let's reroute it to Tanzania, which is a good thing for us. Now, this project is going to cut across several ecosystem areas in Machis on Falls, around the Lake Victoria wetlands, and it has already displaced over 10,000 communities along it. Some communities have been forcefully evicted from their lands without payments and with directions that don't tilt your land until this project is over, right? Now we see what Uganda or Tanzania is going to get in terms of percentages. Tanzania is going to get mere 15% out of 100. Uganda the same, 15% out of 100. Total, which is a French-based multinational, and Sinuk is a Chinese also oil company, is going to share 70% of this project, the cost of this project and the profits. Now you look at this and you wonder, if this is a resource in our own country, who should be getting the best share of this? And Total knows of the profits, that if we have to transition, of course we will have to lose some money before when we can come up to a level where the costs match the interest that we are having. If this ideology technology can change, the West will change. But we are not saying that the West is not taking action, right? We have several young activists coming up. We have several organizations working across their communities to influence this. In France itself, the same case I mentioned, there is French nationals who have taken Total to court also on African, because they feel that our own company must not destroy people's lives elsewhere. And so why this is happening is that now we have inventions coming up, even here in Africa itself. The inventions in the renewable energy is going to overtake the investment in the natural gas. And in the natural gas and oil, we are seeing one in East Africa, another one in Namibia and Botswana, Recon. We are seeing the situation in Mozambique, and these are atrocities by the West. This is called energy colonialism, right? That,
but Prince, looking at that, indeed, the West are doing something, but that is not enough if we decide to compare with the kind of garbage and the kind of emissions that they have.
Yeah, that's true. We are seeing people or the West committing to maybe by 2050. We are having the energy agencies also asking us to do this. We are seeing some commitments. If you look this week or a few days ago, the EU Parliament passed a law that bans investment even in the oil in Uganda. And this is going to take place everywhere in Africa. So they are doing something to, as at now that science tells us that we must stop new fossil fuel developments, right, as we decommission this one. So the West cannot, I'm not kind of advocating for them, but what we call just energy transition, that we give all the energies in place some time so that they decommission. As they decommission, we are increasing slowly the intake of renewable energy, so that even the people with the people employed in this company, which are so many, might get some times also to reorient themselves into the new technologies that are coming. But I hope that by 2050, almost over 50% of existing oil, coal and gas infrastructure will be done with. And by that we hope that maybe 60% of the world will be driven by renewable energy.
Yeah, we are hoping. And Helmer, looking at some of the efforts that you talked about, the cleaning of rivers, the lake, Victoria as well, one common denominator is the biggest garbage is plastics. Yes, indeed, Kenya and a number of countries have banned the use of plastic bags, of which that was a good move, but unfortunately we have seen they're still surfacing. And when we come to the disposal of all this, the West have their own way of disposal of waste, and especially when it comes to electronics, Africa has become a dumping site for substandard, but unfortunately we can't afford the big ones. But the West have their own way of disposal of this harmful environmental, non-biodegradable waste. Here in Kenya, the efforts, are they bearing fruits? We've seen the plastic bags go, but unfortunately we have seen them back, and the disposal of electronic gadgets as well.
Yes, and I think this is really key and important to talk about, especially sustainable consumption and also the idea of really looking at how we design products and other parts of our economy, because it's really key about understanding that this is a supply chain system as well as a production system, that even we have to look into our economy, not just from Africa but globally as well. And this is, I think, the key thing for businesses and also governments and other institutions on really making sure that we're transitioning to a comprehensive look at how we build society and how we operate society, including how we consume and produce. Because it's where, even we've seen with the onset of COVID, I know within the United States there's a global movement against plastics. There was at the UN Environmental Assembly a new convention that was passed to start to regulate both marine plastic and also everyday plastic in communities, but where that will take a long time to actually be implemented. But where we see right now that from COVID even, there is I know at least in the US from movements that for a moment they said, okay, bring back plastic bags, even places where it had been said that that they were no longer bringing. But this is where we're looking right now, and in waste disposal, that there are not the types of disposal systems that are built within northern communities, especially with the context of realizing that this whole idea of plastics was actually really built as a scheme, especially in the global north, in places like the United States or other places, in trying to increase profits of companies and trying to create a demand where it was not necessarily needed, and where communities could actually use sustainable practices that they were using for actually centuries to really actually continue to not impact our planet. And so it was really more built as a scheme for profits and a way to market a product. But whereas today we have to see that we have to transition back to a sustainable consumption and production community. And so that's where even with the waste disposal. So for instance, we know just this weekend we were in Kibera, and some of the youth that were cleaning up, one of the things that they said they needed was actually access to lorries to be able to, because they realized that they've been doing these cleanups, and they've just been shifting piles of plastic from one place to the other because they don't have a means to even shift it to outside of their communities. We know that too we have initiatives that are trying to, and this goes into sustainable consumption and production, and people at the grassroots are doing this, is taking plastic and creating actually products out of them to be able to clean up their communities, and also to actually address the part of pollution and health that's affecting the communities. But this does not take care of the problem of where at the beginning we have to look at our consumption and production models, and also it begins with businesses and also the demand of consumers on what we use and the decision that we use on that. So that's one of the things at the core that we have to change, especially when on a global level and on an African level, of making sure that we are together looking at both how we dispose, but also first trying to demand for better models of where it keeps our environment and our people and society safe.
Yes, indeed. And looking at the pictures and the photos on your screen, you can see we don't have any forest cover, we have erratic rains, we have unpredictable seasons, all this because of the global climate change. But looking at our food sustenance, Prince, we are not having what we should because we are always relying on rain-fed agriculture. The countries in the Middle East and some in the desert, in the Sahara Desert, are well sufficient in terms of food sustenance because of alternative sources of water. Is something that we should be focusing our energies on.
Yeah, indeed. UAE or Dubai is doing great in terms of agriculture, irrigation agriculture. And several years ago, we had good agricultural irrigation, relying on irrigation. If we looked at Mwea, we looked at around Nyanza area, but these are all dead, right? They are all dead, but we do have water running. What we need to focus on is the goodwill and good leadership systems that we're having. The systems, this includes the persons that we have in government, the persons we have in the parliament, the persons, community chiefs that we have. This will bring in the goodwill so that the resources that we have will be used sustainably. In northern parts of Kenya, I do think that there is much that can be done with what we have. Only thing that is lacking is the goodwill of the leadership in this area. We only see leaders there, mostly on our screens when they come for elective posts or when hunger has struck most. But we don't see them when things are really, really good, right? So if we could have a crop of leaders, and it's great that we have this growing youth movement, even in these places, people who know policy in terms of what we can do to this place. Agriculture will do us better. We see and we know the cases or suspicions surrounding the several proposed dams, the Aror, the Quimarer, and so forth, and so many. If we can have our acts together this means the community, and this means the government itself and the private sector. If we can sit down and have a truthful and we have innocent and we have these open conversations, then Kenya would be by far too far in terms of feeding itself on agriculture. We won't be depending on rain. However, if we really look at also the rain-fed agriculture, it's going to dwindle unless we take good measures in terms of saying no to these fossil fuel investments. The energy agents, the Global Energy Agency, warned us that we have a short window that we need to act on. And they say that let us not drill new oil and gas. Let us not work towards having coal anywhere. The ones we have by 2050 will be enough. But if we continue investing on this, then what we are seeing in northern parts of Kenya, what we are seeing in several northern African countries, these are going to really, really get worse. And for Kenya, I would say that if we would embrace technology and invest on it, we have the Indian Ocean. That water is a resource that can be used. We have Lake Victoria. We have Lake Turkana. We have the water that we need. What we lack, we must demand that the West pay this money we invest in it, and we must also hold our leaders accountable and tell them and discuss with them what we need and how it can be done.
Yes, and talking of leaders, Helmer, you have been to a number of African countries and you have seen how countries are managing climate change. Do you believe there is enough goodwill from our leaders in actualizing the goals that we have set in terms of climate change, and more specifically, right here in Kenya, we've seen there's a number of seminars, we've seen a number of conferences just to create awareness. But the question is, do we have enough goodwill from the government?
And I think that's a multi-pronged question, and also because each country in Africa is different and it has different contexts of different things that are happening, and even the environment and what dealing with socio-politically. So for instance, where between Kenya, Uganda, the march will go between Kenya, Uganda. We also have people coming from Tanzania as well, and so I think it's a collective together too, especially from leaders, because leaders don't only have to be within a government, but also leaders are all across that we're seeing, but we're seeing across different levels of government that there are many that are striving and fighting for not just for the addressing climate change, but also addressing all the factors that are affecting people. And of course, this is where it's where from Kenya to Uganda to Sudan to Egypt, I believe that there are many people that are working to try and address climate change and address all the different things that are coming together. It's just sometimes where there is a lot that you're trying to balance between, but also where this is a collective between governments internationally, and so it really takes it to making sure that really seeing that we're all together, and I think there is always room for improvement, and especially right now we can't actually wait, and so we need to urge through government institutions at all levels to be able to address this right now, especially adaptation mitigation. We also have to make sure that we can do that, and I think that's where collectively together Africa is working to, and that's where we can push forward. We have to push forward even harder, and the world has to push forward even harder, because we, as one of our partners, we don't have time. We don't have time anymore, and this is a critical decade that it will determine for hundreds of years the fate of Africa, the fate of the world, especially for even children today that we see in Nairobi, who are just growing up and who don't know if they have a future, and also those who haven't been even born yet, that won't even have that chance, because right now is where we have to stand up. So I think there's goodwill, but we have to increase it.
Indeed, and we always say here in Kenya that we have very good policies, but unfortunately the implementation stage is always an issue. And the COP27, a lot of things that we are talking about here are some of the things that have been discussed in the previous COPs, and more importantly, will be discussed in this year's COP in Egypt. And looking at the efforts that are going towards this COP27, what are some of the things that you're expecting that you're going to see, you're going to hear, and they are going to be actualized?
Yeah, thank you. And just starting at a higher point, we had AU, I think last week, saying no to the EU New Deal on gas, that Africa should transition to using gas as a clean energy. And EU actually sarcastically voted to consider gas as a clean energy. You know, these people are they are charlatans or something of the sort, that they tell you what is good for you, right? But in Africa, we have those leaders, as Daniel says, a leader is not the politician or the mayor or whatever, but all of us, we have these good leaders who know what is right for us, what is right for our communities. And now, talking about COP27, we expect that the African group of negotiators or the African body or the AU is going to have this stand that this is what we want for our continent. You know, we know that Africa is really, really large, right, in real sense. And Africa, if we had our acts together, could feed the entire world, right? So these leaders going there, they need some kind of mentorship. I think our leaders, the political class or the negotiators that we are sending there, they need some mentorship on what we need from this COP27. And it is on our land. What are we going to come up with them? One, we are looking at adaptation fund, right? That should not come in form of a donation or a charity. We call it reparations. Please own up. We expect these people to go and own up for the mess that they are causing, and they continue to cause. And we expect agreements where parties are going to say that let us commit to ending investment in fossil fuels. And we're going to see, we expect that we are going to have developed countries also taking a stand to support poor and vulnerable countries, countries like Kenya and Africa and elsewhere. And we expect that maybe we are going to have a binding deal on climate action.
Indeed. And as we wrap up, Helmer, what are your final sentiments in regards to COP27? And it's a good thing that Prince has talked about. We need to stand up as Africa. We talk about something and try to push its actualization.
I think a key thing, even with this march, is actually about where for COP27, there's been 27. There will have been 27 meetings over time, and where right now this is also not just about what leaders decide, because as we said, leaders are here, and everyone listening to this is a leader, and so it's really collectively together that we're working to because we can't wait anymore. And so with COP27, there's a lot of important discussions that have to be made. And I know we're, especially on adaptation, or as Prince has said, of reparations. There's loss and damage is another discussion. Also with climate finance, these are really important topics that the question is, will it in COP27 actually reach to a hold? Because we know in these negotiations that a lot of times people have been waiting for the message that world leaders and governments have actually done what we've needed them to do. But together collectively, no matter what happens, this is a movement that will carry forward, and it's actually every collective person together that when we join hands, we will make the change. We just have to take it on ourselves and together, and no matter what happens in COP27, we are moving forward and to address everything.
Thank you indeed. Well said. Danielle Helmer, Coordinator, Global March for Planet, and Prince Papa, who is the Programs Manager at Laudato Si Movement. They talking about the climate change, and we have COP27 this year being held in Egypt, and in preparations to that, they are willing and they are going to be walking over 4,800 kilometers just to spread the word and ensure that everything that we talk about in terms of climate change, as even Africans, we do actualize it, because we need this planet, we need this country. Indeed. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Bentro Njue. I will be giving the baton now to the Swahili department, who will be coming with Kurunzi Mashinani and Tamrini. But from me, thank you so much. But if my director can allow me to appreciate just sample one or two 2 messages in regards to the conversation that we have been having. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that, but thank you so much for watching and keeping 8 KBC.